Today they're looking at a mystery show that most people haven't heard of. This show has twist after twist, and by the end, viewers will never guess who the killer is. One morning, Detective Hayes gets a call about a case. Someone found a dead woman's body in a cemetery on the outskirts of London. The body was buried very shallow, and the dirt around it had clear signs of being dug up. Hayes tells his team to bring back all the shovels from the cemetery. The next day, Hayes's assistant, Little Way, brings in a psychologist named Dallin. A few days earlier, Dallin had made the news for saving a teenager from jumping off a building and became a local hero. The three of them go to the morgue, where the medical examiner reveals the victim was stabbed 21 times. The weird thing is, the wounds are all perfectly even and spaced out, each less than 1 inch deep, like someone planned it out beforehand. Even weirder, the pathologist discovers the victim made these wounds herself. They could tell because there were signs of hesitation while making the cuts. In other words, someone forced the victim to hurt herself before she died, then buried her in the cemetery. When Dallin sees the body, he freezes for a moment. Hayes explains that the victim had no ID and was often seen in the red light district, so they think she might have been a sex worker. Little Way asks if Dallin can help make a psychological profile of the killer, but Dallin seems uncomfortable and asks to see the case report. In the office, Dallin flips through the report page by page, his hands shaking uncontrollably. Outside, Hayes and Little Way drink coffee and chat about work. When they finish and return to the morgue, they see Dallin from far away, holding the victim's hand. Dallin leans down and quietly says he's really sorry. Hayes walks up quickly and asks Dallin how he got in. Dallin claims the door was open and explains that since the case report mentioned the victim had a history of self-harm, he wanted to check his theory. Hayes asks what theory, but Dallin stammers and can't explain clearly, his hands still shaking. He says he was just diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. Back at the police station, Hayes checks the security footage and discovers the morgue door was actually closed. Dallin had memorized the password when a staff member typed it in, but lied and said the door was open. Hayes wonders why Dallin would lie. Meanwhile, Dallin goes back to his office and sees a young patient named Curly Hair. A few days earlier, Curly Hair had beaten up a woman just because she cut in line, and the woman sued him. As Curly Hair talks about what happened, he grips a piece of paper tightly in his hand. Dallin notices and asks to see it. When Curly Hair hands it over, Dallin sees the number 21 written over and over. He asks if this number has special meaning, and Curly Hair explains his father drove the number 21 bus, so the number is special to him. After Curly Hair leaves, an assistant gives Dallin a stack of resumes. As Dallin looks through them, one woman's photo catches his eye. He looks at it just once, then shoves the resume into the paper shredder. A few days later, police from another area share a clue. A woman named Shaolin went missing, and her age, hair color, and body type all match the victim found in the cemetery. She wasn't a sex worker but a nurse. Little Way visits the victim's hometown, where the roommate explains that Shaolin was a very lonely person who had a boyfriend in London. Meanwhile, Dallin goes to the police station and shows Hayes a video. On the day police found the body, he and his family happened to be at the cemetery. Hayes asks why Dallin didn't mention this in the morgue that day. Dallin explains he didn't think of it then, but last night while watching videos with his family, he noticed it and felt he needed to make it clear. Just then, Hayes's phone rings. It's Little Way calling to tell him that the psychologist named Dallin knew the victim a long time ago. Hayes looks up but hangs up calmly without saying anything. Early the next morning, Curly Hair comes for another therapy session. They talk again about the line-cutting incident. Curly Hair says it was raining hard that day, and the woman who cut in line was holding a boy who kept crying. He could feel the child was scared. He adds that some people really deserve to die. Dallin asks who deserves to die. Curly Hair pulls out a paper covered with the number 21. Dallin asks curiously if holding that paper makes him feel better. Curly Hair suddenly tears the paper into pieces and leaves the office. That night, Dallin comes home to find two unexpected visitors already waiting for him. There's a photo on the dining table showing a woman who is Shaolin. Hayes asks if Dallin knew Shaolin from before, and Dallin nods, saying Shaolin was once his patient about 5 or 6 years ago. After they sit down, Hayes asks if Dallin didn't recognize the victim in the morgue that day. Dallin explains that at first he didn't, but later when he read the case report mentioning the victim had a history of self-harm, he remembered, so he went back to the morgue to confirm. Hayes gets angry and demands to know why Darlene didn't say this at the time. Darlene takes a deep breath and says, Shaolin's death was so horrible he couldn't believe it. Plus, he had been to the cemetery before, and with all these factors combined, he was worried Hayes would suspect him. Then Little Wei pulls out new evidence. Darlene had been accused of sexually assaulting Shaolin. When Darlene hears this, his hands start shaking. He says Xiaolin later dropped the charges and it was just a misunderstanding. But Hayes points out that Darlene's career was going great and he had just become a hero for saving someone. So if news came out about the sexual assault accusation, all his hard work would be ruined. Darlene interrupts and says during treatment, it's normal for patients to become dependent on their doctors. And he really didn't sexually assault Shaolin. Hayes changes the topic back to that day and asks why Dallin lied about the morgue door being open when it was clearly closed. Darlene admits he lied. Little Wei asks Darlene to cooperate with the investigation and provide his fingerprints and DNA because they need to check the shovels brought back from the cemetery. When Darlene hears this, he swallows hard and says his mother's grave happens to be in that cemetery. There happened to be a shovel next to the grave that he thought was in the way, so he happened to pick it up and move it aside. All of this is just coincidence. Hayes doesn't want to argue anymore and tells Darlene to come to the station tomorrow to give a statement, hoping Darlene won't forget what he said tonight. The next day, Darlene brings a lawyer to the police station. He says 5 years ago he worked with Shaolin, who already had self-harming behavior at that time, which is why they became doctor and patient. Hayes says Darlene then hypnotized Shaolin and sexually assaulted her while she was asleep. Darlene admits that during treatment, Shaolin fell in love with him. Once she tried to kiss him and he refused. Another time she wanted to undress in front of him and he stopped her. Hayes asks where Darlene was on the night Shaolin died. Darlene thinks for a moment and says that morning he was seeing patients at the hospital. In the afternoon, he went to his good friend Jack's place, where he was told he had Parkinson's disease. After leaving Jack's, he went to a nearby bar and drank a lot by himself, and he got home around midnight. Hayes asks if he's seen the victim recently, and Darlene says yes. About a few weeks ago, Shaolin replied to a photo message he sent. After leaving the police station, Darlene goes back to his office where Curly Hair comes for another therapy session. They talk again about Curly Hair's father in childhood, but when they talk about his mother, Curly Hair's expression suddenly changes. He says his mom has cancer and he's happy about it. Darlene is curious, and Curly Hair explains that his mom likes sleeping with different men and never did what a mother should do. He wants to watch his mom suffer and die slowly and painfully. Darlene quietly asks if he could, how many times would he stab her? 21 times? Curly Hair gets angry and stands up, asking why Darlene keeps mentioning the number. And Darlene sees Curly Hair holding something and asks what it is. Curly Hair says it's a wooden whale he carved, explaining he likes to carve things when he has free time, then gives the wooden carving to Darlene. That night at home, Darlene's wife Heijie apologizes to him because she feels guilty for not being there when he was diagnosed with Parkinson's. Just then, the phone rings. It's a doctor from the hospital telling Darlene that Curly Hair was just injured and specifically asked to see him. After hanging up, Darlene rushes to the hospital where Curly Hair says he just had an argument with his fiancée and also mentions he hurt someone in a dream. Darlene quietly asks who he hurt in the dream, but Curly Hair stands up to leave. Darlene wants to get to the bottom of this, but Curly Hair says he has something to do and leaves in a hurry. Darlene stops the doctor on duty and asks if he smelled something sweet on Curly Hair, a smell like chloroform. The doctor shakes his head no. As Darlene walks out of the hospital, he calls Hayes and asks if anyone went missing today. Hayes asks why he's asking, and Darlene says if it's convenient, tests Shaolin for chloroform, then hangs up. The next day, Darlene finds Curly Hair's lawyer, hands over the psychological evaluation report, and asks if Curly Hair has any history of violence. The lawyer says no. Darlene points out that Curly Hair is a warehouse worker making minimum wage, and the lawyer doesn't do legal aid, so how could Curly Hair afford to hire him? The lawyer doesn't answer and gets in a taxi. Darlene goes back to the hospital, and as soon as he walks in, Hayes and Little Wei arrive. Hayes gets straight to the point and says the medical examiner retested Shaolin's body and the chloroform test was positive. He asks how Darlene knew. Darlene refuses to answer, citing patient privacy, but Hayes says this involves a murder case, and if Darlene doesn't talk, he'll arrest him for obstructing justice. Deline reluctantly takes out Curly Hair's file from his bag and adds that Curly Hair is coming for therapy soon. A little while later, Little Wei arrests Curly Hair on suspicion of murdering Shaolin. That afternoon, Deline is resting at home when the doorbell rings. It's a plumber named Damao here to fix the water heater. After checking, the plumber finds the water system has a problem and the whole house needs repairs, which could take half a month. That evening, Deline and Heiji are watching their daughter play soccer when Hayes and Little Wei show up. In front of Heiji, they take Deline back to the police station. In the interrogation room, Hayes tells Deline they questioned Curly Hair that afternoon and talked to people who know him. Curly Hair has no job and no fiancé. He's staying in a youth hostel where people say he's very nice. Also, Curly Hair says that during therapy, Deline made up a story about a woman who self-harmed and even named her Shaolin. Deline interrupts and says Curly Hair is lying. Hayes tells Deline that Curly Hair can't be the killer, because the night Shaolin died, Curly Hair was in night school with more than a dozen people who can give him an alibi. Also, they found Jalene's phone a few days ago with an appointment for the night she died, and the person's name starts with D, which is the first letter of Deline's name. Hayes gets more worked up because all the evidence points to Deline. He's already assuming Deline is guilty, but unfortunately, they didn't find Dalin's fingerprints on any of the shovels from the cemetery. Early the next morning, Dalin leaves the police station. When he gets home, Heiji demands to know where he really was that night. Dalin was questioned by Hayes all night and is exhausted. He doesn't want to say anything and just wants to sleep. Heiji says she didn't see Dalin move any shovel in the cemetery that day, and the night Shaolin disappeared, Dalin didn't come home at midnight but at 4:30 in the morning. He lied to the police about this. Heiji asks if he went to see Shaolin. Dalin is silent for a while, then says he didn't see Shaolin that night. He saw Carla. When Heiji hears this, she gets angry and asks if he slept with Carla. Deline doesn't speak, which means yes. Heiji is furious and accuses him of first sleeping with an old pigeon, then coming home and sleeping with her. After leaving home, Deline goes to his office, where the receptionist tells him Curly Hair is there. Deline closes the door and demands to know who sent Curly Hair to frame him. Curly Hair says no one sent him, and Deline keeps pressing. That afternoon, Deline goes to Carla's house and asks her to testify for him, but Carla refuses, saying it would cause her psychological trauma. More importantly, Deline left at 12:30 that night, and Carla doesn't want to lie to the police. After leaving Carla's, Deline goes back to the hospital and looks up Curly Hair's medical records. Strangely, he finds two different files. Besides Curly Hair, the same ID number registered another file for someone called Straight Hair, and the file shows Straight Hair and Shaolin are from the same hometown. Deline is very confused. That night, he calls his good friend Jack and says he's going to Curly Hair's hometown. What Deline doesn't know is that after hanging up, Jack immediately calls Hayes and tells him Deline is investigating Curly Hair. The next day, Deline drives to Curly Hair's old school, where the teacher tells him that when little Curly Hair was young, his father abused him. Later, a school nurse discovered this, and Curly Hair's dad was accused of sexual abuse. Then the old man died in an accident. After that, Curly Hair closed himself off. After leaving the school, Deline goes back to his hotel and calls his wife, but Jack answers the phone. Deline asks why Jack is at his house, and Jack explains that someone broke into the house during the day, and Heiji was scared. Luckily, the plumber was there, and Heiji was worried the burglar would come back, so she called Jack over. Deline asked Jack to put Heiji on the phone, but Heiji doesn't want to talk to him. Deline gets angry at his friend, and Jack hangs up. The next morning, Deline finds a friend who works in the community and gets Curly Hair's file. The file shows Curly Hair's father had a history of sexual abuse. Deline is very curious because when he gave Curly Hair therapy, Curly Hair really looked up to his father, which doesn't seem like how an abuse victim would react. Even stranger, many years ago, Deline gave Curly Hair a psychological evaluation, but doesn't remember this at all. Very confused, Deline goes to where Curly Hair's father used to work and finds an old employee who tells him the father was a good man and wasn't like a pedophile at all. But after being labeled as one, he killed himself. Then Dalin finds Shaolin's roommate, who tells him Shaolin used to keep a diary, but the police already searched the apartment and didn't find it. Deline is curious why Shaolin applied for the receptionist job at his company. The roommate says someone sent Shaolin a letter, and she was hesitant about going, but her boyfriend in London encouraged her to try. They met a few years ago when the man was a doctor at a nearby hospital. After Deline leaves, Hayes and Little Way arrive. Because Jack tipped them off, they've been having people follow. Deline Hayes threatens the roommate, who reveals information about the diary. The roommate says Shaolin always owed rent, so he took her laptop, and the diary should be on the computer. He hands the computer to Hayes. Meanwhile, Deline returns to London where his business partner brings Shaolin's application materials. At the time, Deline only looked at it once before throwing it in the shredder, but the materials clearly showed Shaolin had worked at Jack's place. Deline guesses Shaolin's boyfriend might be Jack. Even scarier, Jack was the one who introduced curly hair to him. Deline suspects Jack is behind all this, but he's known Jack for over 20 years, and Jack is his best friend. So why would he frame him for no reason? That night, Deline goes to Jack's house to get answers, but Jack isn't home. As he searches around, he finds a photo of his own wife in a drawer. After leaving Jack's house, Deline gets a call from Hayes who tells him they found Shaolin's diary. It clearly records details of an affair between her and Deline. Deline strongly denies it and says it was Jack who had the affair with Shaolin. Not him, but Hayes says Jack already confessed. He was with Shaolin, but they broke up 2 years ago. Also, the night Shaolin disappeared, someone can give Jack an alibi. Deline asks nervously who that person is. Hayes is silent for a moment, then says to ask his wife. Deline doesn't get it at first, then realizes the truth. Simply put, the night Deline cheated with Carla, Hayes was also cheating with Jack. It's raining hard as Deline comes home. From far away, he sees Jack flirting with his wife. He hides in the bushes for a while, and after his wife goes upstairs, he can't take it anymore. He walks into the yard and the motion sensor light turns on. Curious, Jack walks into the yard and Deline comes out of the darkness. He holds back his anger and demands to know why Jack lied to the police. They found Shaolin's diary, and in it they found her boyfriend D, which is the first letter of Jack's nickname. Deline confronts him step by step, saying Jack introduced curly hair as the most important part of framing him. Then he swings a punch at Jack. But Jack dodges and denies everything. The two argue as they walk into the house. Deline pulls out the photo he found at Jack's house and throws it on the table, asking if Jack still has feelings for his wife. Hearing the noise, Hayes comes downstairs. Jack admits he's deeply in love with Hayes and has never stopped. He also admits he saw Shaolin later, but didn't kill her. Hayes angrily asks Jack why he didn't go tell the police. Jack says he didn't want to get involved. Deline tells Jack to get out of his house. After Jack leaves, Hayes tells Deline to go to the police station and tell them the truth, that he was with Carla that night. Deline responds with silence. Hayes tells him she's pregnant and can't handle any scares right now. After hearing this, Deline decides to go talk to Carla. But when he gets to Carla's house, he finds Carla already dead. Deline doesn't know what to do. He panics, grabs Carla's car keys, and drives away from the scene. Meanwhile, Hayes gets a call about the case from Carla's neighbor. When Hayes arrives at Carla's house, the neighbor describes what the intruder looked like, and all the features match Deline. Hayes immediately issues an arrest warrant. Early the next morning, Jack goes to the police station and confesses to Hayes. The person D in Shaolin's diary isn't Deline. It's him. Hayes demands to know why Jack didn't say this earlier, and Jack says he was with Deline last night. If Deline hadn't reminded him, he wouldn't have known Shaolin kept a diary. After hearing this, Hayes and Little Way immediately go to Deline's house. But Deline already left. Hayes says Deline went to see Carla last night, but Hayes says Carla was strangled to death in her apartment last night. Hayes insists it couldn't have been Deline because Carla was the only person who could prove his innocence. Little Way tells Hayes that's just her husband's story. No one can prove he was really with Carla that night, and now there's no way to prove it. Hayes leans down and quietly tells Hayes that if she really wants to help her husband, she should call him back and have him go to the police station and explain everything. Meanwhile, Deline drives to his father's farm and tells his father he's caught up in a murder case. All the evidence points to him, and he hopes his father can take him in for a while. After showering and changing clothes, Deline plans to get some sleep, but coming downstairs, he hears his stepmother arguing with his father. Deline doesn't want this to affect their relationship, so he makes an excuse to leave. The stepmother pulls Deline to the backyard and says she recently hired a temporary worker to renovate the barn. She takes out keys from her pocket and invites Deline to take a look. Deline sees a wooden whale carving on the keychain. He grabs the stepmother's hand and urgently asks where the wail came from. The stepmother says the temporary worker gave it to her. Deline asks what the worker's name was, and the stepmother says if she remembers correctly, his name was Curly Hair. Deline freezes, remembering the wooden whale Curly Hair gave him is exactly the same as the stepmother's. Meanwhile, Heiji is teaching a class. In the back row, Curly Hair is listening intently. After class, Heiji sits in her car, looking at missed calls from her husband, and is about to call back when someone knocks on the car window. She rolls it down and Curly Hair says his ankle is hurt and asks for a ride. Kind-hearted Heiji unlocks the door. As the car drives, Curly Hair starts talking to himself, saying his mom really likes speaking Spanish because it makes her feel exotic. He came to Spanish class because his mom is dying, and he wants to tell her in Spanish how much he hates her. Realizing something's wrong, Heiji stops the car and tries to escape. But Curly Hair grabs her. Heiji begs for mercy, but Curly Hair says Deline should have saved him, but instead told the police that Curly Hair killed someone. Heiji honks the car horn repeatedly. Luckily, the plumber Demao happens to be on the roadside and helps chase Curly Hair away. When she gets home, Heiji calls her husband and tells him about Curly Hair attacking her. Deline asks what else Curly Hair said, and Heiji says Curly Hair said his mom is dying and he wants revenge on her. Before Heiji finishes, Daline's father hears cars. He goes to the window and sees police cars heading their way. He quickly warns his son, and Daline runs. Father and son come to the forest behind the farm, where the father gives Daline some money and his old car. Meanwhile, Hayes finds Curly Hair and asks why he attacked Heiji. Curly Hair says Heiji's husband framed him, and he was angry, so he got in Heiji's car and cursed at her to let off steam. Little Wei asks why he's learning Spanish and why he's taking Daline's wife's class. Curly Hair says Deline suggested it. Try something new because it might help with treatment. Hayes asks if Curly Hair had contact with Daline's father, before Curly Hair nods and says a year ago while hiking, he met Daline's father who said he had a son who was a psychologist. Curly Hair felt he had mental health issues, so he found Deline hoping he could help. The next day, Deline rushes to the hospital where Curly Hair's mom is staying. Because of chemotherapy, her hair has almost all fallen out. Deline introduces himself briefly, and unexpectedly, Curly Hair's mom grabs his hand and presses it against her chest, as if she wants something to happen. Deline says he came because of Curly Hair, and the mom lets go of his hand. Deline asks if there's more to the story about her husband abusing Curly Hair, because he read the testimony and many things she said contradicted each other. The mom stays silent. Deline asks again if she was wrongly accused. The mom gets emotional, pulls out the IV tube, and says she's only 42 and dying. She's paying the price for what she did. A nurse walks in and kicks Deline out of the room. After leaving the hospital, Deline goes back to the community office and asks his friend to show him Curly Hair's file again. The friend tells Deline that about 2 years ago, Curly Hair came to look at his file. Daline's eyes flash with surprise and he asks if Curly Hair might have taken some pages. The friend says no problem. They back up the files. He opens the backup and compares, finding some pages are indeed missing. Those pages are a psychological analysis report, and at the bottom, Daline's name is clearly signed. Deline doesn't remember this at all. The friend reminds him that maybe he covered for a colleague, and this jogs Daline's memory. Deline recalls everyone connected to Curly Hair's abuse case. The school nurse who reported it and the judge who tried it all, lost loved ones and family members. If these are all coincidences, that's way too coincidental. Thinking of this, he picks up the phone and calls his business partner, asking them to find that colleague from back then. Meanwhile, Hayes and Little Wei go to the hospital where Curly Hair's mom is. The nurse tells them that after Deline left, all of the mom's tubes were pulled out. Hayes guesses Deline might have tried to kill Curly Hair's mom. After leaving the hospital, Little Wei gets a call from a colleague at the station saying they just intercepted Daline's phone records. The person he called was his business partner, asking them to find a former colleague. They already found that colleague's address through GPS. After hanging up, Hayes and Little Wei drive to the colleague's house and find that person already dead at the desk. Early the next morning, Deline finds the old school nurse whose daughter died of a drug overdose, but the nurse doesn't think it was an accident. He tells Deline that the man who gave his daughter drugs was well-dressed and very handsome. Back in the car, Deline tells his friend that the person who killed the nurse's daughter probably wasn't Curly Hair, because the old nurse said the man was very handsome. Deline suspects the case might be connected to Jack. The friend urges Darlene to go to the police station and find Hayes, hand over all the evidence he found, and explain everything. Meanwhile, at the police station, Little Way tells Hayes they found another shovel at the cemetery. Before she can finish, Hayes gets a text message from Darlene telling him to come alone to the hospital rooftop. Hayes rushes to the hospital rooftop where Darlene is already waiting. Hayes tells Darlene to come back to the station with him because he has severe fear of heights, but Darlene doesn't want to go anywhere. He tosses over the evidence he found and tells Hayes everything he recently discovered. He hopes Hayes will carefully look at the evidence because the killer's revenge isn't over yet, and they should immediately send people to protect his former colleague. But Hayes says they found new evidence. Someone hid a shovel under the bushes, and he bets it's covered with Darlene's fingerprints. Also, the colleague Darlene mentioned is already dead. Hearing this, Darlene turns to run. Hayes tries to stop him, but his fear of heights is too severe, and he's stuck on the stairs and can't move. Darlene sees this and comes back, using his psychologist skills to help Hayes get back onto the rooftop. Meanwhile, Jack won't give up. He goes to Hagee's house and explains that he already went to the police station and told them everything he knows. He hopes Hagee will forgive him and tries to kiss her, but she pushes him away. Damau, who's fixing pipes in the basement, hears the noise and comes up asking Hagee if she needs help. Seeing an outsider, Jack leaves unhappily. On the other side, Darlene finds Curly Hair and asks if he killed Shaolin. Curly Hair ignores him and keeps walking. Darlene brings up Curly Hair's father and calls him a coward, weakling, idiot, loser, moron, and stupid. Hearing this, Curly Hair raises his hand to hit Darlene. Police hiding nearby rush out and pull the two apart. Hayes arrests Darlene on suspicion of murdering Shaolin. Little Way leads Curly Hair away from the scene, and after turning around, a barely noticeable smile appears on Curly Hair's face. At the police station, Darlene strongly denies having anything to do with the two murders. He begs Hayes to carefully look at the evidence he found. Just then, Little Way gets a call from a colleague, and the interrogation is suspended. Outside the interrogation room, the colleague tells them the test results for the newly found shovel are back. It's indeed covered with Darlene's fingerprints, but only from one hand. Hayes sighs, goes back into the interrogation room, and apologetically tells Darlene he's being released because no one would dig a grave with just one hand. Plus, Darlene has Parkinson's. Clearly, someone is deliberately framing Darlene. After Darlene leaves, Hayes tells Little Way to bring in Curly Hair. But when Little Way gets to the hostel, Curly Hair is gone. Meanwhile, Darlene comes home and sees the plumber Damau packing up. He greets him and walks toward the living room, but he sees his wife and daughter tied to the refrigerator. Curly Hair tells Darlene to take out his phone and sit at the table. Meanwhile, in the basement, Damau turns on the gas valve and presses the button on a timer bomb. Then he climbs the stairs to the living room and ties Darlene up with zip ties. Curly Hair walks over and pulls out a paper from his pocket. He tells Darlene it's his father's death report. Back then, because of Darlene's psychological evaluation, the jury found his father guilty. Then he looks up at Damau and says it's this guy who killed their dad. Damau leans down and quietly tells Darlene he installed a bomb in the basement and not to try to defuse it because it will explode if touched. Then he and Curly Hair try to leave, but at the door they run into Little Way knocking. They have to go back to the living room. Outside, Little Way sees no one answering and is about to force her way in when the doorknob turns and Darlene walks out. Little Way says Curly Hair is missing and she came to check if Darlene's family is safe. Darlene is silent for several seconds and says everything's normal, but his eyes turn toward a nearby delivery truck. After the door closes, Little Way calls Hayes and tells him about Darlene's strange behavior. Hayes hears this and calls headquarters to request backup, asking them to block off the streets near Darlene's house, set up a temporary command post, and contact hostage negotiation experts. Meanwhile, Hagee begs Damau to please let her daughter go. Curly Hair walks over and calls his brother away, saying outside is blocked by police and they can't leave. Damau tells his brother the bomb can't be stopped and will explode if touched. Curly Hair says it's okay. Everyone paid the price and this is the last family. On the street, Hayes rushes over and Little Way follows, saying she's worried she saw it wrong. Hayes says it's okay. Seeing it wrong is better than doing nothing. Inside the house, Darlene asks the brothers why they took revenge on so many people, but left out the one person they hate most. Curly Hair says he doesn't want to hear about that woman. Darlene asks if Curly Hair is afraid to face his mom. That woman was so strong and did so many terrible things to him. Curly Hair says through clenched teeth that Deline doesn't know what she did to him. Deline tells Curly Hair to say everything. Curly Hair recalls memories buried deep in his heart. When he was only 6 years old, his mom drove him to a parking lot, then went to another car and had physical with a man, forcing Curly Hair to watch the whole process. Afterwards, his mom told Curly Hair she really liked him sitting there watching. It was exciting, Demao tells his brother to shut up, because there's a child here. Curly Hair laughs and says back then he was only 6 years old too. So why did his brother abandon him? Curly Hair gets more and more worked up. He says his mom often took him to a big barn where there were 30 or 40 pedophiles. He can't remember clearly. Those people waited every night for him and other kids to come over for their entertainment. Demao can't listen anymore. He unties the ropes and lets the mother and daughter go. Curly Hair says to his brother that he ran away again. After Heiji escapes from the house, she tells Hayes the house has a bomb installed and the kidnappers also put gas cans everywhere. Inside the house, Deline asks Curly Hair if his brother abandoned him back then. Demao tells Deline to shut up. Deline quietly asks if Demao is the one who killed those people. His brother had an alibi. Demao turns his head and admits to the murders. Deline continues, saying Demao is doing all this to get his brother's forgiveness because he abandoned him back then and left him alone in that dark barn. Demao should have saved him. Just like how he just let Deline's family go. If Demao wants to, it's not too late now. After hearing this, Demao hesitates for a moment, then suddenly stands up and pulls Deline to his feet. Curly Hair asks his brother what he's doing. Demao says Curly Hair just needs to tell them it was all his idea. Back then, Curly Hair wanted Demao to save him, so now he should listen to what Demao says. Meanwhile, outside, fully armed special police are about to break down the door when they see it open. Demao comes out holding Deline and Curly Hair. The lead officer immediately raises his gun and shouts a warning. Unexpectedly, Demao suddenly raises his hands and uses zip ties to bind his brother and Deline together. Then he pushes both of them away, turns around, goes back into the house, and closes the door. And here the story ends with an open ending. We assume that Demao died in the bomb blast so that he can protect his brother. Eckhart Tolle once said that everything is an illusion of the mind, but trauma is not. Trauma stays with you for life. The things people do to each other leave scars, and the only thing we can do is live with those scars. Okay, that's it for this episode. If you thought this video was pretty good, remember to give me a like. See you in the next story. Bye-bye.